So once again, good afternoon to all our viewers on Facebook and on YouTube, as well as those of us who are in the Zoom meeting room. It's good to see you once again, and we move on to our next program or next session, and that is the Q&A session. We had our third lecture, which is on foreign policy at independence. Mr. Ako talked about friends to all and enemies to none. It used to be a foreign policy, but now it's a foreign policy principle, and he gave you the details about that. And now we'll be having a general discussion with Mr. Ako. Mr. Ako has written about uh, the Second World War, and he's a really good historian. He's captured a lot of interesting details about our history. So I'll give him this opportunity to share what he has written, talk to us about his book and historical experiences during the war period and how it is of relevance to us, the lessons and the experiences. In order to go forward, we have to learn from the past. The past is we draw lessons, we draw analogies, we learn from our mistakes, and then we improve in order to be better. So learning history is a really good thing. Many of us we slept in our history classes and we didn't pay enough attention to our lecturers and our teachers in secondary and university, but history is very important. So that's something that Mr. Ako will stress on. Please, Mr. Ako, the floor is
Okay.
yours, the virtual microphone.
Thank you very much. I'll share this screen. So it's the Nameless Warriors is the book I had the privilege of, humble privilege of writing back nearly 10 years ago, just to in remembrance of the fathers who fought during World War II. Okay, so sorry, just a moment. So this is me and the old warrior, Ben Moide himself, at his Waikani residence. I was doing interviews for him in preparation to write this book. So we'll all realize that why it is nameless. Well, the picture says it all. The only person that was named in that picture was Sergeant Ben Moide. He's holding the Brand gun here on the right of your screen. So I would really love to put names to the rest of those warriors attending this class. You can see this is the Papuan Infantry class. In Papuan Infantry Battalion class, you have some Papuans here, but there is also a person from the New Guinea Islands, a couple of them sitting there. And now, if you know World War II history, where did these New Guinea Islanders come from? Did they come with the Japanese as carriers and then made the shift across to the PIB? No, that history will tell us that. So the story of World War II as it was fought in Papua New Guinea has been written extensively by experts. And Mr. Egger, I need to commend you for putting this topic on this Remembrance Day week because just Tuesday this week, we celebrated the Remembrance Day celebrations. There's been a lot of arguments from around the country saying as to what is there to remember. And some of these are coming from highly prominent Papua New Guineans who are very ignorant to this very fact. You can see that the Japanese on their regional domination program landed at Gona and were ready to advance onto Australia. And it's very, the war when it came, brought in a lot of animosity between even our own villages also, as to who we were supporting. And before the war arrived, we only saw as far as the next mountain. We never knew what was behind those mountains. Only the brave warriors went across to explore. No one went to do that. So Ben Moide was a teenager. His recruit number was PN67. So he enlisted in the newly formed Papuan Infantry Battalion in 1940, and he would later be a platoon sergeant in the C Company of the PIB during the course of the war. He was part of the group that made the initial historical contact with the Japanese at Awala. In fact, he was the person holding the brain gun who fired the first shot at the advancing Japanese. So there's some history there. And these are the Papuan Infantry Battalion soldiers getting ready to for battle. You can see the bayonets which are fixed to the rifles. Very ferocious looking mob. So you will hear of superhuman deeds done by our warriors during World War II. But then when you look at the awards given to them during the war, they do not match the effort put in. So, we question ourselves then. So what was happening? If there are widely told stories of our warriors single-handedly wiping out Japanese patrols, then why weren't they not given a Victoria Cross? The Victoria Cross is the highest award that can be given in the Commonwealth for exceptional deeds, and our warriors did make exceptional deeds during wartime. So you start asking yourself questions around that. So the background to the war in Papua, everyone knows that. Those who read history would know that. When World War II started, there were only about 1,500 Europeans in Papua. Well, there was 1 million indigenous inhabitants. These local people were not united and consist of many tribes, different customs, languages. They had intertribal fighting animosity. And the Europeans during the time we also engaged in copper and rubber production and some mining, as we saw in our first lecture. So when the Japanese bombed Rabaul in 1942, war had been already raging in Europe in the last 2 years, but it didn't affect Papua and the League of Nations mandated territories, which was in New Guinea after the Germans lost the war in World War I. When the Japanese started making inroads, it changed Papua New Guinea forever. And the Japanese were unstoppable because they used all types of techniques to advance, you see. You could, when you look at the defense of Corregidor in Manila or the Fortress Singapore, while the British were manning their defenses, the Japanese landed by boats and started bicycling across the jungle. So they surprised the highly motorized and advanced military of that time. So you will know that the Papua and the mandated territories was virtually undefended when World War II began. All of Australia's military people were up in the Europe and the Middle East. And all that was left when the Japanese attacked in 1942 was just over 1,000 people, mostly young, inexperienced, poorly trained militia. The militia formed part of the 10th Battalion and the other battalions that came up from Australia. And these were farm boys, people they found on the streets, in the farms, in the rural areas. They tell you, they were not trained soldiers. And these were the group, together with the PAB, that felt the full brunt of the Japanese onslaught in 1942 and held their ground. And I will come back to the shedding of that blood and why it is important in PNG-Australia bilateral relations. See, so the Japanese were ready to move, and move they did. And in the meantime, they were already also attacking. They were trying to get to Australia through the Solomon Islands, through Guadalcanal, Canal, and they had a huge array of troops there. And that part, the Allies allowed the U.S. Marines to cover them there. So the Japanese came up to the Owen Stanley Ranges, and they were halted there by the Papuan Infantry Battalion and the mostly poorly trained Australian part-time soldiers until the arrival of the Australian Imperial Forces on the scene. So taking their places among the older, more experienced and initiated veterans was this 18-year-old sergeant by the name of Ben Moide. Together with all the others, they all stood there, shoulder to shoulder, and defended their tribal territory. They knew they were fighting an enemy. All they knew was that they had to stand their ground and defend the territory. You see, by the end of the war, there was barely any mention of their achievement in the numerous history books on this topic. When you read stories of the Kokoda campaign in international war book, it is always about the Australian digger defending his territory. And of course, we were part of the Australian territory. So by right, we were all Australians, but there was no mention of indigenous soldiers fighting. Okay. And the Remembrance Day is very, very critical. It must be remembered. Because while people look at Remembrance Day and say, lest we forget, all because of these warriors, the irony of the Remembrance Day falls upon the bilateral relations PNG currently enjoys with Australia. You see, it was up on Kokoda that Papua New Guineans and Australian soldiers or warriors shed their blood. And upon shedding that blood became the glue that binds PNG and Australia together forever. And therein lies the importance of the bilateral relations. See, so when you have people questioning why Remembrance Day and yet yet continue to promote bilateral relations, then they are missing the plot. And like Mr. Aguirre said earlier on, history. We must look back at our history to plot what's going forward. But then if we Papuans do not remember, do not pay any significance or respect to the Remembrance Day celebration and look at it as another public holiday, then you are missing our history and the importance of bilateral relations. The PNG-Australia bilateral relations was not built upon the colonial relationship. It was built upon the blood shed by both Papua New Guineans and Australians that made us what we are today. Okay. I don't know whether this will show. It's a video of the funeral service held at Ben Moide at the Hanover Poropoena United Church. And like I mentioned earlier on during one of the lectures, my father was one of the first 4 army chaplains to have taken over from the Australian Army. And here he is again called upon by the Army to do the funeral service. I'll play it and see if it can work on your stream, Mr. Aguirre. Can you see it, hear it?
We can see, but no sound.
The song they are singing is the Motuan farewell song. They sing when the casket is always carried out of the church after the funeral service. In the background is the late Kenol Bagiola also, Hanwa Baran. And then this was when his headstone was unveiled at that Tarama Barracks military cemetery, and I was invited to also attend the ceremony over there. So that's my take on why the history of our fathers during World War II is important for us to plan going forward. We mentioned about the national security policy, or why security and trade are important in a country's foreign policy. All these things must be taken into account. There are instances where some military types ask me, what is the PIB? And, it borders on being, it borders on, it's hilarious when some military officers do not know what the PIB is. The Papuan Infantry Battalion, formed in 1941, 1942, disbanded in 1946, is the forerunner of the Pacific Island Regiment, which was formed in 1951 until 1975 or 1974, when the Defense Department was the first department to be localized. The Defense Department was Papua New Guinea's first ever department structured before the other departments came to the public service. And that was the importance both countries placed on the military, because when you talk to military officers, they will tell you that the PNG Australia military relations is the glue that binds the two countries together. Without this experience, World War II experience, we would be just bilateral friends, just like our bilateral relations with other countries, taken at face value and just progressed. There is no meaning, and this is compounded by the fact that the two prime ministers walked the Kokoda Trail last month, because they know that that is the spirit of the bilateral relations lies during the Kokoda campaign. So I'll stop there and allow for questions and answers. I will also stop sharing, and I will
Thank you,
send this.
Mr. Ako.
I will also send you a copy of this presentation so you can share around later.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Ako. It's a Q&A session, students on Zoom and for those watching via Facebook. Your questions, comments directed to Mr. Ako, generally on the floor. We're talking about history and the significance of history, and as Mr. Ako so eloquently shared with us, the Kokoda walk, the Kokoda diplomacy, that's a very important, if you maybe get data from one of those government organizations and look at the number of visitors from Australia going to Oro, Popondetta, and then walking from Popondetta across to Port Moresby or to Sogeri, along the Kokoda Track, we might see this, the number of tourists or Australians traveling there is more than those traveling to other parts of PNG. So that signifies something. And it's connected to the Second World War and what the Australians and the Papua New Guineans did during the war. And it's of great significance to those people who are ancestors or relatives of those people who served during the war and who walked the Kokoda, and those who died as well, lost their lives along the Kokoda Track, defending their democracy from the attack of the Japanese. So it's very important when you go back and look at history and then use that now to look at our bilateral relations. That's why we are more stronger. And also, if you look at, if you read through Sean Donnie's book, Sean Donnie, The Embarrassed Colonialist, he talked about Australia not leaving any colonial legacy, big buildings or big significant infrastructure where it symbolizes Australia's colonization period or colonial history. That's something interesting. If you compare that with Kokoda, we have nothing to signify Australia's colonial period, but then the Kokoda track signifies the World War, Second World War, and now Australia worked with PNG to address the security threat that was facing Australia. So that's really interesting. Any questions, comments from
Thank
those
you,
of
Ralph.
you on Zoom? Please
If
go
I
ahead,
may
Mr. Abu.
also, the Australian Military College also employs or has sessional history lectures from the universities, from civilian lectures across the university. I know very well that the Dickens University of Melbourne has talking slots at Dantrum, where lecturers go and talk about military history and how so what they do is they keep on talking about military history to their officer cadets. So when the officer cadets graduate as second lieutenants, they know the military history of how they came up to be. And these are some of the ideas which our PNGDF could utilize to have UPNG or Divine Word teaching military history at the Officer Cadet School at the Joint Services College at Egan Barracks. Because the Joint Services College at Egan Barracks is where they train officer cadets to become leaders of men, to become officers. And see, the soft skills you require will help you in your military life, in your military career. You have opportunities there for lecturers to go and teach military history or non-military topics like agriculture, economics, education. Those were topics taught straight after independence. When you look at the current or former PNGDF commanders like General Singirok or Ambassador Peter Ilaw and others, they will tell you that when they went to the JSC in 1976 or 1975, they were taught education, commerce, economics by the Australian instructors and by those who were there to instruct, in addition to military arts. So I'm not really sure whether these are taught at the moment, but that's the reason why you see these former officers carrying them, having a strong bearing of current events, in order because those were drummed into them, and it will help our leaders. And even the JSC had the police officer cadets and correctional officer cadets back in the 1970s. It was also open to the public service, but history tells us that the public service never sent officers there to the JSC at the officer cadet school at Egan Barracks. So it is very important to start looking at this. You look at some of the army barracks in Australia, like Canangro Barracks, which I had the opportunity of visiting. On all their pathways and walkways, they have signboards of Kokoda, of Awala, of Isurawa. So every minute you walk past, and that name is stuck in your head. It gives you that sense of pride, that because Lord Naomi stopped, because our fathers fought. And those are some of the things, if we can do them like that, then all we can do them by talking about them in lectures such as this. Okay? Talking about them in lectures such as this. And when you look at the establishment of the PNGDF, you will realize that when you look at Papua New Guinean organizations, the PNGDF is the oldest organization in this country, established during the PIB, disbanded in 1946, re-established as the Pacific Island Regiment in 1951, Harama Barracks, Murray Barracks, Goldie, Egan Barracks, Moen Barracks, and Lobo. Those were all constructed along those times to support this organization. So when you actually look at the organization, it's more than what, 80, 70, 80, 90 years old. While the current other government departments were formed after independence. But when you look at the PNG as an organization, it was formed earlier on. So it has a vast, rich tradition, which we can all be proud of. And for those of us who had fathers serving in there or uncles or brothers serving in there, it's a very proud moment to have them wear that uniform and to know that that uniform, the reason why they wear that uniform was because it was because of the men and warriors who fought during World War II and shed blood there. Then you look at, I mentioned to you about that picture about the New Guinea Islands looking, two or three of them standing in that class. How did they come across? Because all we know was that the Japanese landed in Rabaul. So when they came across, they brought their carriers too. So obviously some of these boys would have ran away to join the other side. That's why they are seen in class. And one of the famous Manus sergeants, Warrant Officer Matpi, is very, very famous because he came over as a carrier, ran away, and then gained notoriety as one of the star soldiers. And when there was an uprising in 1946, when the sergeants of the PIB complained that why they were wearing laps while their Australian counterparts were wearing trousers, they had to call in Matpi to come and cool the situation. So that shows that he was well respected. And then you had people like Katwe, whom the word green shadow rhymes around because Katwe operated alone and he was feared by the PIB themselves too. You know, Ben Moida told me, Katwe man, mi pa supported Leme because once he walked, no one must go and touch him or walk around him. He operated alone and he moved along and he went and came along. So those type of stories inspires people, inspires us to move forward in our relationship. So like I was saying, so when you were in any diplomatic engagements in reception or what, this history breaks ice. If you do not know this history and you are in a bilateral meeting and after the meeting there afternoon drinks and you're with the Australians and you just talking about World War II, but you talk on them. So it's best to understand this because the military history is critical in PNG-Australian relations. Diplomacy, trade, yeah, important, but the glue that binds this relationship is military history. Yes, there are politics behind it, but when you look at it, when you look at the academia versus the practitioner. Now, in the military scenario, you will look at us as academics and the soldiers as the practitioners. So when the bureaucrats hang group around and talk, they will talk about high-level stuff in terms of military. But when the soldiers sit down and talk, they will talk about how their relationship was born, how when they went on patrol, on the Mangi Australia Karim, on the Papua New Guinea because Legbem Bagarap Noboko. They'll talk about all those things. And that capability peaked in 1980 when we went to Vanuatu to support Father Lini and his government while Mr. Stevens rumbled on up in Espiritu Santo. After that, when we returned in the 1980 after the Vanuatu oppression, we became more independent in terms of the Commander Diro left and Gago Mamai took over, and that was when a political interference started happening in the army. They started working towards the current challenges we have now. It all started back after 1980. But then you will note that the PNGDF and the Australian Army have gone through a number of development cooperation arrangements, which has seen a lot of exchanges happening. But how we equalize those on more beneficial terms is up to our governments to decide. Like I said, I lived in all the army barracks except Murray Barracks and Goldie, so I could go on and on and on and tell you about the wonders of the tourist resort barracks in Moyam, or we could go and visit the jungles behind Egan Barracks, or go up to Long Room and go and wait for the patrol boats at the wharf while they were coming in alongside. It was such a important and great memories of growing up in the army.
Mr. Ako, Sylvia has a question. Sylvia, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ako. You mentioned the Defense Department's vital role in the relationship between Australia and PNG. In your book, you mentioned also that in 2000, a Commonwealth Eminent Persons group led by Gerard Hensley of New Zealand and Major General Michael Jeffrey of Australia reviewed the PNG Defense Force, and they recommended downsizing the force, but the rank and file were never consulted on this recommendation. Now, Australia also offered to facilitate this downsizing exercise. This task was important, but why downsize instead of addressing the structural imbalances, maintenance, and supply deficiencies, as well as personnel management issues presented in the EPG's report to the government?
That's a very important question. This was in 2000, I think, right?
Yes, November 2000.
Yeah, it was in 2000. When you look at our history back then, there was a lot happening around then. November 2000, those EPG came, and then it resulted in I remember correctly, all the brass and everyone was asked to go and meet at the Maribyrnong Rugby Oval, and then this huge it was like a huge wind that blew down the tent, sitting all the VIPs, and they started chasing everyone all over the place. And that was simply because the talk survey never went out to all the units. So the units started questioning, how come the government is talking about downsizing the Miplano survey? And while that was in play, there were others who were leaving also. Others who would put in their voluntary resignations to leave the army, and they were still waiting for pay. They were still waiting for pay, and the issue was about money. And in addition to that, around that time also, you would also know that the students had gone on strike maybe a year later with regards to the government's privatization bills and all that. And I think 4 students were shot and killed by UPNG students. So a lot of those things were happening. And while those were happening, there was also Bougainville was, the rumbling was still on. Bougainville rumbling was hired. So you look at logistic issue within the army, how they were moving their logistics men and supplies across to Bougainville to look after that. And not very well that the government that time didn't have budget to 100% fully support the army. They had to worry about our education, agriculture, health, everything. So it was tough times. And then now they were talking about downsizing because they had a so-called burden. You will realize also that the white papers were in motion also. It was taken wrongly. I think the idea was correct. It was taken wrongly by people that they were saying that the Australian government want us to downsize so that they can properly manage the resizing. But then you have to look at the capability of the managers. By the time the barracks were not getting adequate funding to be renovations and all that, and there was also the Moyam mutiny. All these issues would relate to the Moyam mutiny in 2002, I think. So there was a lot of issues happening that time, which was why they had to government in its wisdom, decided to change Brigadier General Malpo and replaced him with current now retired Ambassador Peter Ilau, who became the first naval commodore, naval officer to command an army. And that in itself is also another story, and it's shrouded with politics, because now you had a Navy person coming in to command a traditionally green uniform organization. So a lot of all those things were happening. So when you look at the size of them, I think they were looking at the downsizing from about 4,100 to 2,000. And over the course of the next 10 years, rebuild it up slowly. That was the understanding. That was the understanding behind the downsizing issue. Sylvia, I hope I've answered that correctly or shed some light on your issues.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sylvia. Mr. Ako, I have a quick question for you. For the sake of the students, could you differentiate the role of a military defense attaché from a serving diplomat or political attaché in a particular embassy? You were former serving foreign service officer, so I'm asking, could you distinguish the role of a defense military attaché from
Yeah,
other
sure.
diplomats or
From my
representatives?
experience at the mission in High Commission in Canberra, you have the defense attaché there who becomes the liaison officer for this current defense PNGDF, PNG Australia Defense Cooperation Arrangement. He becomes a liaison officer. He attends all the meetings, organizes exchanges, all that in liaison with the headquarters. I think he or she is independently funded by the PNGDF, and they work separately, independently, but knowing that the head of mission is their head. So that's the difference. While the normal PNG normal diplomats would go about carrying out their daily duties as a diplomats, but anything that comes to military nature, they hand it over to the defense attaché. Now in China, because there was no defense attaché there when I was serving, it would also come to the first secretary, and I would liaise with PNGDF headquarters. If there was some development cooperation initiatives or some issues, then we just became the post office. So the advantages of having a defense attaché is that you can deal with most of the issues on the ground instead of waiting for word back from headquarters to support the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ako. Any more questions, comments? We have a few minutes remaining, roughly 17 minutes. We'll stop at 3:15. If you have any questions or comments for Mr. Ako, those watching via Zoom, please feel free to ask your question or make your comment to add on to the discussion. Our discussion today is on lessons and experiences from the Second World War. And we're looking at history and why history is significant when you're studying foreign policy and when you're thinking about foreign policy formulation. We have to know our history. We have to go back, like I was saying a few minutes ago. We have to understand our foreign policy since independence in order to come up with very strategic or good foreign policies going forward. Mr. Ako has a meeting at 3 p.m., so I will stop it here. We'll stop the meeting.
Thank you.
I will make sure I get you people to share your questions and comments, and in our next discussion, we'll share that with Mr. Ako and we'll continue the discussion. But we once again thank Mr. Ako for his precious time and for his patience, for sitting with us and sharing with us his knowledge and experience. And we wish you all the best this afternoon as you go for your next meeting. And also to the students and viewers on Facebook as well as YouTube, thank you for joining us. And we'll continue with the discussion on PNG's foreign policy and add more value to what's happening. Help us to understand our way
Okay,
forward.
thank you very much,
Thank
everyone.
you,
Have a
Mr.
good weekend. Study
One
hard.
kind. Same to you.
Bye.
Thank you, Truly.